Now let's get started cleaning up the tracks. You probably already heard the bleeding going on everywhere. So let's take, for example, the kick drum. You don't only hear the kick drum, you also hear the rest of the drums. You see, and for a tight metal mix, we kind of want to get rid of the bleeding. Now for other genres, you may want to work with the bleed, but not so much metal, because, well, we are kind of going to heavily EQ stuff to make it sound very powerful and mighty and in your face. But, well, take for example the cymbals bleeding into the snare. Or the hi-hat also. Now when we EQ the snare, then the bleed of all those cymbals into the snare can sound really weird in the end, which can also make the cymbals all together sound kind of weird in the mix. So getting rid of the bleeds will tremendously help keeping everything clean. Now the trick to getting rid of the bleed is gating. You may just want to put noise gates on the drums and then fiddle around with all the parameters, but that can get kind of difficult in the end. What I personally like to do is put a Transient Designer first. So let's see, where's my Transient Designer, my trusty Dominion. This is a free Transient Designer which works out quite well for me. Google is your friend most of the time. So let's just do this whole thing on the kick drum first. So let's single it. And then we'll see. Now what I like to do is boost the attack a little bit and suck out the sustain. So now you can already hear I made the peak come out a bit more, get a bit higher in volume, and the bleed already gets less when I turn down the sustain. And this will make the gating much easier in the end. Okay, so all right, now let's put in a gate, dynamics, C1 gate. Now it would be beneficial if you have a noise gate with separate opening and closing threshold, because then you can put the opening threshold a bit higher, so really just the peaks of the drums open up the gate, and the bleed actually has no chance coming anywhere close to the opening threshold, so it won't come through. And then the closing threshold you can put a bit lower, so the gate doesn't close too early, and it lets the full drum sound actually pass through it. But if you don't have separate closing and opening thresholds, you can also work with the hold time. For example, give it a good 40 to 50 milliseconds. In this way, the gate will not close until those few milliseconds are actually over. So you will also let more of the actual drum sound through. Okay, now the attack time, I wouldn't put too fast, because when you put it too fast, like here, 0.01 milliseconds, then it can create a bit of a clicking sound, and you don't really want to have that. So I put it a tad slower, perhaps around the 1 millisecond area. And in this way, the gate actually creates a bit of a slope when it opens up, and then everything sounds good again. Now the release and the hold time I also wouldn't put too fast, so it doesn't shut off too quickly. Something around this area, and now let's try out. Yeah, something like this. Now let's do it like that for the rest of the drums. Alright, so I now quickly did that. Let me just show you the snare drum, for example, at first. See what's going on here. That's how it sounds like now. Yeah. And the toms, I did those separately because depending on the mic placement and the other stuff around those toms, and also depending on how the drummer hits those individual toms, of course you should probably set those differently, and this is what they sound like now. All right. Without those gates, you have all the mess up in there again. All right. Yeah, so that is that. Okay, now for our hi-hats and overhead, I don't want to use gating, but just simple filtering. Because, well, those cymbal type parts of the drum kit are more geared toward the mids and higher frequency range, and all the bleed that go into them from the rest of the drums, like kick and toms and snare, those are more geared toward the lower range of the frequencies. So if we just use filtering, it already helps out quite a bit. Let's see, solo the hi-hat. Yeah, that's already pretty good right there. Then overhead. Let's just copy it over there and sweep until we find a good spot. Yeah, something like this. And now let's check again everything together. Yeah, you can hear, perhaps lower the toms a bit again. You always need to check your volume balances when you do stuff, because everything will get changed somehow. Okay, now let's check again with our rhythm and bass. Yeah. And there we already have our first step done. So summing up, we checked our volume balance and we got rid of the bleed and filtered our overhead and hi-hats. And yeah, that's it doesn't sound like much to do, but it's actually quite a bit of work because, you know, setting all the parameters exactly the way that everything comes through clearly without diminishing the sound, well, can be kind of tricky. So yeah, just have fun experimenting. Now we are done with the basic cleanup, and with the next part I will get into some precise cleanup with cutting EQ and perhaps already start with compression and perhaps some more EQ to work on the sound and perhaps some more compression. See ya!